My name is Lin, 22 years old, and tonight should have been the happiest night of my life. But under the blinding chandeliers of the grand ballroom, I stood trembling in a plain white gown that wasn't even my own. The lace was frayed at the edges, borrowed from a distant cousin of a distant maid. It hung awkwardly on my body, 2 sizes too large, the sleeves slipping from my shoulders every time I shifted. Compared to the glittering gowns of the guests, I looked like a beggar who had wandered into a palace. And in truth, wasn't that exactly what I was? Beside me, tall, commanding, and cold as winter, stood him, my new husband. The CEO everyone feared, the man whose wealth could buy and sell families in a single gesture. My master yesterday, my husband today. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, his broad shoulders sharp against the soft glow of the chandeliers. His every movement screamed power, precision, and disdain. He stood still as a statue, his jaw tense, his hand refusing to even graze mine. The priest's voice echoed through the hall, calling for vows, but his cold silence struck harder than any rejection. Whispers rose around us, sharp and cruel, slicing through me like glass shards. Is that really the bride? A maid? She's not even pretty. How humiliating for the family. Why would the CEO degrade himself like this? My palms were clammy, my knees weak. I tried to hide the way my hands trembled by clutching the bouquet tighter. But the rose's thorns pierced my skin, warm blood trickling between my fingers. Still I smiled. A small broken smile. As if I didn't smile I might collapse. He turned slightly, eyes glancing at me for the first time that night. Those eyes deep dark like cold oceans. No warmth. No compassion. Only a flicker of irritation, as if my very existence offended him. And then in a voice low enough that only I could hear, he whispered words that would forever brand my heart. You are nothing but a replacement. The room spun. My lungs tightened. Replacement? For whom? My throat burned with unshed tears, but I dared not let them fall. The ceremony continued as though my humiliation meant nothing. Champagne glasses clinked in mocking celebration. Cameras flashed like daggers, and my ears rang with the crowd's cruel laughter. When the priest said, "You may now kiss the bride," he stepped back. No hesitation. No explanation. Just rejection. Gasps rippled through the hall, followed by smirks and muffled chuckles. I felt a wave of heat rise in my cheeks, shame flooding every corner of me. I lowered my eyes, unable to meet anyone's gaze. My heart pounded so violently I feared it might break free from my chest. My lips trembled, but I forced them into stillness. Because if I showed weakness, if I cried, they would win. The crowd's voices grew louder, crueler. Even he can't stand to touch her. She'll be gone in a month, just watch. What a pitiful bride. Their words blurred together, a chorus of mockery, and in that moment I wanted to disappear. To sink into the marble floor and never be seen again. But I stood there, motionless, breathing through the pain. The banquet that followed was no better. I sat at the long table, ignored like an invisible shadow. He spoke with shareholders, smiled at business partners, laughed with acquaintances. Not once did he acknowledge me. A waiter brushed past, spilling wine onto my gown. Red stains bloomed across the white fabric like open wounds. I jumped, instinctively apologizing, though it wasn't my fault. The waiter muttered low class under his breath, not even bothering to hide his disdain. I sat frozen, cheeks burning, staring at the floor. Every sound was amplified. The clink of crystal, the rustle of silk dresses, the dismissive laughter. The more they celebrated, the smaller I felt. Like I wasn't a bride at all, but a servant mistakenly seated among royalty. And yet, beneath the humiliation, a quiet voice stirred inside me. Endure. It wasn't the first time I had been mocked. It wasn't the first time I had been treated like dirt. But tonight, it cut deeper because the man I had been forced to marry was the one leading them all. I tried to eat, but every bite turned to ash in my mouth. I tried to smile, but my lips refused to move. My only solace was staring at the flickering candlelight, watching the wax drip slowly, steadily, reminding me that even in silence things could change. When the music swelled and couples danced under the chandeliers, I remained seated. Alone. My fingers dug into my lap, nails biting into my skin just to keep myself grounded. The CEO glanced at me once more across the table. His lips curved slightly, not in kindness but in a mocking smirk. And then he looked away as though I didn't matter. The humiliation was complete. That night as I stood before the crowd, mocked, belittled, unwanted, I realized something terrifying. This marriage wasn't a union. It was a cage. And I had just stepped inside. But deep in my chest, beneath the shame, beneath the trembling, a spark flickered. A quiet resolve. Because while he thought I was powerless, while they all believed I was nothing, I knew the truth. I could endure. I could survive. And one day, even the man who refused to touch me tonight would no longer be able to let me go. The night of the wedding ended not with romance, but with silence sharper than any blade. When the last guests finally left and the chandeliers dimmed, I followed him to the luxurious suite prepared for us. My heart thudded against my ribs, a rhythm of dread, not hope. Every step I took echoed on the marble floor like footsteps of a prisoner entering her cell. Inside, the suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city, velvet drapes framing the skyline, and a bed large enough to swallow me whole. Yet I felt none of its beauty. To me it was a cold fortress. He removed his jacket with deliberate precision, draping it over the chair as if I wasn't even in the room. His silence was suffocating. I stood awkwardly at the door, my hands clutching the skirt of my stained gown. "Change," he said finally, his voice flat, emotionless. Not a request, a command. I swallowed, nodding quickly, retreating into the dressing room where a red silk nightdress had been laid out. I didn't dare touch it. I changed instead into a plain set of clothes I had brought myself, the kind I always wore, simple cotton, humble, unremarkable. When I stepped back out, his eyes flicked to me, lingering on my modest clothes. For the first time that night, his brow furrowed slightly, as though offended by my very existence. He turned away without another word, picking up a file from the desk, flipping through contracts even on our wedding night. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling like furniture, present but invisible. The silence stretched until I could no longer bear it. My throat tightened, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper I asked, "Why me?" The pen in his hand stilled for a fraction of a second. He didn't look up. His reply was cutting. "Because no one else wanted to." My chest constricted, air escaping my lungs in a painful rush. I was not chosen. I was discarded into his life like trash that no one else would keep. The words lodged in my heart like shards of glass. I wanted to cry, to scream, to ask what crime I had committed to deserve this punishment. But instead I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, and forced my lips into stillness. Endure. That night, I lay on one side of the massive bed, while he remained on the other, as far from me as possible. I listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional rustle of pages turning. Sleep evaded me. Every second stretched endlessly, pressing down on my chest until dawn finally arrived. The following morning was no kinder. At the breakfast table the long mahogany surface gleamed, covered in a feast of delicacies. Croissants, fresh fruit, smoked salmon. I sat silently at one end, while he sat at the other scrolling through his phone. Not once did his gaze lift toward me. Then came the whispers. The servants moved around the room clearing dishes, but their eyes darted toward me, their voices low yet sharp enough to pierce. "She doesn't even belong here. Look at her clothes, how embarrassing." A maid pretending to be madam. Their snickers coiled around me like snakes. My fingers tightened around my teacup until I feared it might shatter. I kept my head lowered, hiding the flush of humiliation spreading across my cheeks. And still he said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't silence them. His silence was permission for their cruelty. Later that week, I was summoned to his family's mansion for the official introduction. The moment I stepped through the gilded doors, I knew what awaited me. His mother's sharp eyes swept over me, her lips curling into disdain. His relatives stood in small groups, whispering, their gazes dripping with contempt. "Is this the bride? She looks like a servant. Such an insult to our family name." My body stiffened, my pulse racing, but I forced a smile, bowing respectfully. At dinner, I was placed beside him at the grand dining table. Yet the distance between us felt greater than the sea. His family asked questions not to know me but to humiliate me. "What school did you attend? What family background do you come from? What achievements can you boast of? Each question was a dagger, designed to expose my poverty, my lack of status, my unworthiness. I answered softly, honestly. I had no prestigious degree, no wealthy family, no notable achievements. I was only a maid, forced into a role I had never sought. Their laughter rang out like cruel bells. A maid? Can you believe it? Our family deserves better. What a disgrace. My cheeks burned, my vision blurred, but I held my head high, refusing to let tears fall. Across the table, he sat in silence, sipping his wine as though none of this concerned him. His indifference was the sharpest cut of all. By the end of the night I felt stripped bare, humiliated beyond repair. And yet, as I lay in bed later, staring into the dark ceiling of the cold suite, that quiet spark inside me flickered again. They believed I was nothing. They believed I would break. But they had underestimated me. Because while my hands shook, while my heart bled, I still breathed. And as long as I breathed, I endured. What they didn't know was that endurance could turn into strength. And strength could one day bring them to their knees. That night, lying on the far edge of the bed, I closed my eyes and let the memories come rushing back. The whispers of his family still echoed in my ears. Maid, disgrace, unworthy. I curled my fingers tightly, pressing them against my chest, as though I could stop the flood of old wounds reopening. They didn't know where I had come from. They didn't know the path that had carved me into the woman I was. I was not born poor. My earliest memories were filled with laughter. My father's warm voice, my mother's gentle embrace. We lived modestly but happily. Until the day tragedy struck. I was 12 when my father fell gravely ill. His treatment consumed everything we had, savings, jewelry, even the little home we called ours. I watched my mother sell her wedding ring just to buy his medicine. But in the end, nothing could save him. He died with my hand in his, whispering apologies for leaving me behind. Grief tore through us, but poverty was merciless. Within months, my mother too fell ill, weakened by exhaustion and despair. 15, I was left alone. No parents. No protection. Just debts, hunger, and the weight of survival. I worked wherever I could. Scrubbing floors, carrying crates, washing dishes until my fingers bled. Every coin I earned barely covered a bowl of rice. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in a damp, narrow room, stomach aching, tears soaking my pillow. Still I endured. When others mocked me, I lowered my head. When employers shouted, I bit my tongue. I learned quickly that silence was safer than defiance. The world was not kind to girls like me. At 17, I found work as a live-in maid at a wealthy household. The pay was small, but at least I had food and shelter. For years I scrubbed marble floors until my knees went numb, polished silver until my reflection blurred, and learned to move quietly through gilded halls like a shadow. I saw luxury up close, crystal chandeliers, imported gowns, grand banquets. But none of it belonged to me. I was always reminded of my place. I was the girl who bowed, who obeyed, who cleaned what others dirted. Sometimes, late at night, when the mansion was silent, I would stand before the tall mirrors, imagining myself in gowns instead of rags. For a fleeting second I would allow myself to dream. But then the cruel voice inside reminded me, know your place. You are nothing. I never imagined marriage would come for me in this way. Not as love, not as choice, but as a transaction. His family needed an obedient bride, someone to carry their name without asking for more. I was convenient, voiceless, powerless, disposable. And so here I was, sitting in silk sheets that weren't mine, beside a husband who despised me, surrounded by in-laws who ridiculed me. Yet as I stared at the dark ceiling, I realized something. I had already survived worse. I had buried my parents. I had starved. I had been treated as less than human. And still I stood. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my bowed head meant surrender. But inside me lived a fire, small, quiet, but unyielding. One day, I promised myself, that fire would burn bright enough to blind them. That day wasn't here yet. But it was coming. For now I endured. I played the role they cast me in, bearing their cruelty without a word. Because endurance was my shield. And patience was my weapon. And while they looked at me and saw nothing but a poor maid, they had no idea what strength hid beneath my silence. I turned onto my side, pulling the thin blanket tighter around me. His back was to me rigid, distant. He would never imagine the storm of memories and vows raging in my chest. But one day he would see. One day they all would. And when that day came, their whispers would not be laughter. They would be apologies. The grand banquet hall shimmered with crystal chandeliers, but my hand shook as I clutched the hem of my plain dress. I had been ordered to stand silently behind my husband, the almighty CEO Adrian, while he entertained his guests. The women at the table wore diamond necklaces, laughing softly as they leaned toward him. CEO Adrian, surely you don't let your wife handle public appearances. She seems unrefined. The way they said wife felt like a knife against my skin. Adrian didn't defend me. Instead, his lips curved into that cold smirk I despised. She's nothing special. Just a contract. A tool my family threw at me. Don't expect elegance from a maid. The room burst into laughter. My ears rang. I forced myself not to cry, not here, not in front of them. My fists clenched behind my back. I wanted to scream, but instead I whispered to myself, endure just a little longer. Later that night, I found myself cornered in our bedroom. Adrian's tie was loosened, his expression sharp. Why didn't you smile? Why didn't you play along? I glared at him for the first time, fire trembling in my chest. Because I'm not your puppet. You can humiliate me in front of your world, Adrian. But I won't sell my dignity for your pride. For a moment, shock flickered in his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it brushed against my ear. Careful, Lina. You're forgetting your place. I snapped back, my voice trembling but strong. No, Adrian. It's you who's forgetting that I'm not just a maid. I'm your wife. The silence that followed was heavier than chains. His hand reached out as though to grip my chin, but it faltered in midair. For the first time he didn't know whether to punish me or admire me. And in that hesitation I realized I had finally cracked the armor of the heartless CEO. Adrian's heart is shaken, but will it turn to obsession or tenderness? I realized something terrifying. The man who claimed to hate me couldn't stop chasing me. The morning after our clash, I avoided Adrian like a shadow avoiding sunlight. I slipped out of the mansion before dawn, rushing to the market to buy groceries. I thought I was free from his cold gaze, but as I bargained with the vendors I felt it, that piercing stare. When I turned he was there. The CEO in his tailored suit, utterly out of place among sacks of rice and crates of vegetables. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they burned. Why are you here? I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead he reached forward, taking the heavy basket from my arms with ease. You don't need to carry this, he muttered, almost too low to hear. I froze. This was the same man who had mocked me before countless eyes, the same man who swore he would never accept me. Yet now, in the bustling market, he carried my burdens like a husband should. That night things grew stranger. I woke from a nightmare, breathless and trembling, only to find him standing at the edge of the bed. His eyes softened in the moonlight. You were crying in your sleep, he murmured. I couldn't ignore it. My heart thundered. This wasn't kindness, it was obsession. His touches lingered too long. His eyes followed me wherever I went. The heartless CEO who once despised me now hovered like a man possessed, as if my defiance had lit a fire he couldn't extinguish. But deep inside I was torn. Could this be real affection? Or just another cruel game? When his hand brushed mine at dinner, I pulled away. His jaw tightened, his voice low and rough. Don't run from me, Lina. You don't know what you've done to me. I can't let you go now. For the first time, the terrifying CEO didn't sound powerful at all. He sounded desperate. And that desperation scared me more than his cruelty ever had. Adrian is no longer indifferent, he's obsessed. But is obsession the same as love? Or the start of a dangerous entanglement? This is how the man who once despised me finally fell to his knees. It was raining heavily that night. I stood by the window watching the city blur into streaks of silver. Behind me I heard Adrian's footsteps, heavy and uneven. For once he didn't look like a CEO. His tie hung loose, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Lina, he whispered, almost broken. You don't know how much you've changed me. I wanted to stay silent, but my heart betrayed me. You humiliated me, Adrian. You made me feel worthless. How can I believe a single word now? He stepped closer, the storm outside echoing the storm in his chest. Because I can't live without you. The moment you defied me. The moment you showed me you weren't afraid. I realized I couldn't let you go. I turned, tears blurring my sight. His hand trembled as he reached for mine. This wasn't the arrogant man from before. This was someone stripped of pride. Someone who finally understood the value of the woman he had dismissed as a maid. Stay with me, he begged, his voice raw. Not because of the contract, not because of my family. Stay because I love you. The words I thought I'd never hear fell heavy between us. For the first time I saw sincerity in his eyes. Fragile, desperate, and real. I closed my eyes, remembering the girl who had once been forced into this marriage, humiliated and voiceless. And now here he was, the heartless CEO brought down by love. When I opened my eyes I whispered, then prove it. Not with wealth. Not with power. Prove it with respect. He dropped to his knees before me, his hands gripping mine. I swear, Lina. From this day on you're not my maid, you're my everything. The storm outside raged on, but inside for the first time I felt safe. The man who once imprisoned me with cruelty now bound himself with love. Would you forgive Adrian if you were Lina? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more unforgettable love stories where even the coldest hearts can melt.